Hi everybody, today's video is going to be on finding your center of interest. So I want to talk about how to think through the composition and how to build it around your focal point or your center of interest, how to use thumbnails to simplify and design your composition. Then there'll be a short, kind of sped up video that I'm going to talk through where I show how to mix the values and colors that emphasize the focal point. Then afterwards, I'll wrap it up with a few takeaways from the video. Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about finding the importance in your reference of what it is you want to say or show in your painting. It has to be a lot more than just copying what's in front of us, whether you're using a photograph or you're painting outside. There has to be something that grabs you and you want to mold a painting around that. This was a photo in northern Georgia, near Blue Ridge, Georgia. And early in the morning, it's spring, looks somewhat like fall, like these could be fall trees, but it's early spring. And early in the morning, so that there's a lot of strong dark and light, long shadows, a lot of contrast. And I like this scene here, the road here kind of leading you in and around the painting. Also, of course, the strong sunlight, the shadowed background hills, sunlit trees in the ground, and the shadow kind of in the foreground, and sunlight, and then shadow again. A lot of strong dark and light contrast that create shapes that make a good composition. But then there's a lot here that's uninteresting. Of course, the fence. I don't think I need this much of the photograph. It's just spreading it out too far, going horizontally and trying to show everything. So I wanted my focal point to be right in here. So that means I want to stop not too far past that. Maybe somewhere around in there. Have that be the edges to my focal point. Then I do like the logs. That made an interesting theme to the painting. Logs here and there. But I ended up doing something else. I combined another photograph. Where is it? Right here. Of this barn and stuck it in the photograph here. Then after, well, here's my thumbnail. Did a thumbnail here to show how that combination is going to work out. Still have that road leading in here. Trees, sunlit trees, shadowed background. The layers of dark and light, long shadows. Added some horses here. Didn't, I don't think, in the color sketch. But this sets up everything. This simplifies what I'm looking at. It gives me parameters of what I'm going to paint according to the photograph. How have I changed things? A bit more of a squared rectangle as opposed to a longer horizontal that I have here in the reference. Cutting out a lot of the foreground, a lot of the right side, and offsetting this house here just to the right of center. Now what I have, after that I did a color study from this, and I sped it up in about 9 minutes long. But it goes through the process. You can see the block in, or the drawing stage, where I just take this thumbnail and transfer it to the canvas, and then start laying in big areas of dark and light. Now when I start this color study, I'm using my thumbnail to do the drawing, because the thumbnail is where I've made all the changes. So I'm just putting the brush down on the canvas. I'm painting with burnt sienna. Just put the brush down and start scribbling in shape. Again, looking at my thumbnail drawing, because that's where I've simplified things. It's where I found the shadow pattern, the big shapes. So keep things big and simple. Then, like I'm doing now, I'm using a slightly smaller brush, a little bit of blue and burnt sienna to get slightly darker, and just giving some outline to the main trees, the house, and kind of establishing things a bit more. But I'm still thinking simple shapes. I'm still trying to keep things big and simple. Pretty much just the light and the dark. Now, when I start mixing in color, again, I have my values laid out in the thumbnail drawing. That's what I'm following. So I try and match the value in my thumbnail drawing as far as the big values go. And I also want to think in terms of temperature when it comes to color. Because temperature, whether the color is cool or warm, is what's going to make the painting read as sunlight and shadow. Not so much the local color. The local color doesn't matter as much. In other words, is it a green tree or yellow tree, orange tree? It's not a matter of matching the photograph. It's a matter of coming up with the right temperature so it looks like shadow or sunlight. And that's more important than anything else. So I'm thinking cool and warm, and I'm starting out by blocking in the shadows here, using blue, blue-green, a little blue-violet in the distant mountains. And now I've got a little bit of the trees blocked in there also, as well as the dark roof. And that's all my darks. And that allows me now to start laying in the lights. And I'm working back to front. The light in the mountains, just a slightly muted warm color. Then the light in the trees is going to be a lot warmer because it's a little closer. The sun is really blasting those trees. So I'm using a lot of yellow, whether it's yellow-orange, yellow-green, doesn't really matter. What matters is pushing the temperature. Really warm and light where the sun hits it, and cooler and darker where the shadows are. And if you focus on that, you'll come up with color that works a lot better. Now I'm laying in some of the main parts. The house on the left is not the focal point, but it is kind of the balancing point of the bigger house on the right. So laying in the trees on the right also, pushing the color a little bit differently than the photograph. Photograph is kind of monochromatic green. So I'm making some of the trees more orange, yellow, or yellow-orange, yellow, yellow-green. And real careful again to find that shadow pattern and really separate it from the lights. That's the main thing here, is how I'm keeping the lights and darks really separated to show how intense the sunlight is. And if I go for subtlety in the painting, in other words, more middle values, and don't get those extreme darks and lights, it just won't work as well. Laid in the road now, I see the road is just an orange, muted with a little violet. Getting into some dark accents. And no detail at this point. Oh man, I don't think I go into any detail here at all. I keep it big and simple because this is more of a color study before I do a bigger painting. Now, this is the lightest part of the painting, the house. So I'm laying it in with palette knife. Just want to get a lot of paint down there. Then some smaller brushes, I'm cutting into the tree to just show the shape. Cut into the tree a little bit with the negative shape of the house. And just getting simple dark and light. Again, extremes. I want to go for the extreme light and dark to show how intense the light is. If it's a cloudy day, I'm going to go more subtle, more halftones. But on a sunny day like this, just blast it in there with dark and light, warm and cool. And don't worry about local color. Don't worry about matching the color in the photograph. So again, simple shapes. Longer I work on this, the tighter it's going to get, or more detailed it's going to get. Paintings never get looser the more you work on them. They always get tighter. So I try and keep these as big and as simple and as loose as possible when I start out. And then gradually as I work on it, I break it down to smaller shapes, smaller values, which means more detail. So I have to decide where to stop before I overdo the detail. And a lot of times I do overdo the detail and I have to go back and kind of scrape, simplify again, and keep it more loose. Now, I am getting into a bit more detail now on the focal point. Also in the focal point, the white barn, I've got my darkest dark in there, the opening to the barn, as well as the lightest light, the sunlight on the white part of the front part of the barn. So then just a few revisements on the barn on the left. Just trying to think through what it needs now. Now I'm working smaller. I got a smaller brush and just adding small little darks and lights or maybe accents of color. Try not to render too much. Think more in terms of spots of small color or spots of small value. Again, gradually getting smaller. When I get down to this small little brush like this, I know it's about time to quit. And I usually go past. I usually get a bit too much detail, then have to go back and scrape a few little areas to get rid of some of that picky detail. Because too much detail takes away from the overall effect of the sunlight, of what the light's doing to the subject. And that's my goal, is always just to show what the light's doing. And then around the focal point, have most of the detail. I don't want to detail the mountains because they're way in the background. Foreground is not that interesting. I don't want to spend too much time there. And the more you paint, the more you kind of work that out. Also, the more you paint, the more mistakes you make. You'll overdo paintings a lot, but then you learn to back off. So you learn probably more from the paintings where you mess up so much than those paintings that happen to work out well. You learn from your mistakes, not from your successful paintings. So now I'm getting a little bit of detail in the background or a little bit of subtle changes, but I don't want to overdo it. Every time I work in the background or in the foreground, I'm always kind of looking at the focal point and trying to judge if I'm starting to take away from the focal point by adding stuff in the background or things in the foreground. Lastly, and I tend to leave this for last, the sky, because the bare or the toned canvas is usually about the same value as what the sky is going to be, or close to it. So I can always leave that till last, especially if it's outside, because I'm kind of chasing the light outside or trying to beat the movement of the light. So I can leave that sky till the end. And sometimes I can leave the sky till I get back inside. Here I'm trying to get a little bit of cast shadow on the barn. It helps to, when something that's small like that, put in the shadow and then go back to the light area and cut into the shadow to kind of refine the shape a little bit. And that will do it. Okay, so the 3 big points to that video is, number 1, to simplify your subject into big, dark, and light shapes, and you do that with your thumbnail. And it might take 2 or 3 or 4 thumbnail drawings to arrange those big, dark, and light shapes into a good composition. But it's not about detail. Also, these thumbnail drawings are not finished drawings. They're just little scribbles of dark and light shapes, trying to think through how you're going to simplify your subject and arrange those big shapes. Number 2 is to have a definite focal point or center of interest, and that's where most of your detail is going to be. And the rest of the painting is simplified. You try to see how much detail you can eliminate everywhere else. And thirdly, the focal point is where you're going to have the most contrast, most value or dark and light contrast. It doesn't have to be the darkest dark or lightest light, but just has to have the most contrast. Because wherever your most contrast is, that's where the viewer is going to look. So if I have it in the upper left-hand corner, that's where the viewer is going to look first, not the focal point. So have the focal point be the area with the most dark and light contrast. Well, thanks for watching with me today, and check out my video on seeing abstractly for more ideas about composition and how to simplify your paintings. That video will help you create more interesting compositions. And don't forget to subscribe so that you'll be notified when I post a new video. Thanks for watching.